Great, thank you, Jan. Thanks, everybody. Pleasure to be here in this very pleasant space. My first visit to this spot, and glad to be addressing ZETA. So, as Jan says, I'd like to talk about the development of renewables in the region and the prospects that raises for renewable energy trade, both within the Gulf region and in the wider region, particularly electricity, but also other energy carriers like hydrogen. Next one, please. And I think this is important because of the challenges that the region is facing in the longer term. I mean, right now things are going pretty well, I would say, but we can all see that the challenges on the horizon. There's a need for employment, economic growth, diversification. I mean, that's not new. That's a very long-standing issue since the 60s or 70s, but has always been a challenge. And yeah, there's been progress in some areas, but not in others. Oil and gas demand longer term is slowing. Now, when exactly we'll see a really significant slowdown or even a drop in oil and gas demand, that may be soon, it may be more distant, but it's on the horizon, I think, clearly at some point. And lower prices in general. Oil prices are a bit lower right now. I think oil prices are okay right now, but not particularly high. But they obviously could fall in the long term if demand was dropping off. There are trade barriers, there are carbon tariffs coming in from the EU, there are trade barriers in general, particularly from the US. And perhaps we'll see more protectionism that creates challenges to other kind of forms of trade. And we know all about the regional climate challenges. We know that temperatures are rising pretty visibly in this region. We know about extreme weather, floods, and so on, and political instability, not in the Gulf, not in the GCC particularly, but in neighbouring countries that could be badly affected by climate change, and that instability could spill across borders and affect the region. And new energy technologies are becoming more and more competitive. Obviously, solar, wind, batteries, electric vehicles, those we've seen dramatic progress in all of those over the past few years, as we know, and they're becoming very realistic competitors to oil and gas. And no doubt other technologies will come in and improve in the next few years as well. This creates opportunities, though, for the export of new technologies from this region, for this region to become a centre of new energy technologies, whether it's using them, manufacturing them, being a part of supply chains, and exporting energy that is produced with these new technologies. So whether that's electrons or hydrogen or derivatives of that. And so that's really what I want to focus on. What kind of possibilities are being unlocked by this new energy technology growth, and what kind of market mechanisms or policies or approaches are needed to support that. Yeah, and just to emphasize the oil demand point, I mean, we know that the economy of this region still depends very heavily on oil exports. Yes, the UAE is more diversified now, but if we take a country like Kuwait, and of course Jim and I were speaking on an event just last week on Kuwait and its energy development and the challenges it faces. Kuwait is still very heavily dependent on oil exports. If oil demand starts dropping off and if prices fall, then all the countries in this region, even the more diversified ones, face some big challenges. Now, is demand going to drop off, tomorrow, as Greenpeace might like to say? No, probably not. But if it drops off in the mid 2030s, let's say, that's only 10 years away. It's not that much time to prepare. Luckily, this region has seen tremendous progress in renewables, and it's been a real leader in deploying renewables. Not in volume terms so much, although that is coming, but in terms of the costs that have been achieved, world record low costs, going right back to 2014, 15, when Dubai did its first significant utility scale solar project and achieved what was then a remarkable price, 5.8 cents per kilowatt hour, and that had kind of halved on what you would have expected from 2 years earlier, and that I think got a lot of attention. And since then, we've seen the costs with the big projects in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and so on falling dramatically, and just over a cent a kilowatt hour now for the big solar projects, and also interestingly for wind projects. Wind coming in Saudi Arabia was something like 1.5 cents, remarkably cheap. And some people from the outside will say, well, these are not real prices. No, I think there's plenty of evidence these are real competitive prices that were obtained in proper market processes, and these really reflect the advantage of this region. Obviously, excellent solar conditions, good wind in some places, large areas of open land, very big projects with economies of scale, a much more streamlined process now that the utilities are not used to it, low costs of capital, some technological innovations like bifacial panels, but primarily kind of large scale and good organization, and not having the barriers of permitting and long approval processes that you get in Europe or North America. So we can expect this to continue. Are we going to see prices below a cent? Some point maybe, but even if they hold around a cent, that's still
a euro cent already.
A euro cent, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And do they need to go much lower? I mean, they may well fall, but they're already at the level where they are, beyond competitive with oil, gas, other energy sources. And so this is our own outlook for Abu Dhabi, for example, for its electricity generation. And you can see up till 2020, of course, it was entirely gas-fired, the purple and the blue. Then the nuclear power, the light green at the bottom, started coming in. But then more and more solar, which is in the yellow. And we really see that the trajectory is that the solar will increase and increase. There's no obvious need to build any kind of other power generation. There'll be some additional gas-fired for backup, but that would increasingly be there for reserve use only.
For the night times.
At night time, but now we have the big project in Abu Dhabi, the 5 gigawatt solar plus batteries, which we'll have. I'll talk about that in a moment, but that will provide 24-hour power, steady power. And the great thing, of course, about the UAE and the Gulf is, what do you need power for? Air conditioning, and your match of that solar and generation is extremely good. All you need is something to take you through the night time, which batteries are now perfectly capable of doing. So very different problem from Europe, where it's the middle of winter and you haven't got much solar, and then maybe the wind drops off and you need heating and so on. And so you need seasonal storage. Here, the seasonal storage problem is, if it exists at all, it's far smaller than in Northern Europe. So we could see moving in the UAE to a system of essentially entirely solar and batteries, and then with the nuclear, which exists already. And really any Gulf country could do the same, and particularly if they have good wind as well, like Saudi Arabia and Oman, throw wind there as well, and then it helps you with the nighttime and the winter period. So this, I think, is the trajectory where things are going. Very low cost power, renewable dominated, and therefore creating the opportunity to do something else with that power. And so we looked at, here's a kind of a synthetic example. This is a Saudi case that we looked at. This is kind of with real weather data for Saudi for a year. What would the wind and solar output be? So we said, let's take 4 gigawatts of wind, 5 gigawatts of solar PV, and put a 35 gigawatt hour battery with that. And then you can see the generation. This is, again, as real data over weekly data over the course of a year. You have the wind output in the blue, you have the solar in yellow, and then the battery is filling with the grey at the bottom when it needs to, and discharging in the brown again at the top when it needs to do that. And you can see, you can kind of approximate a steady output of something like 3 gigawatts at an 88% capacity factor with this mix, and with only very minor curtailment of the solar. If you want to do 2 gigawatts steady, you can do the 98% capacity. You'd have more curtailment, of course, but you could do that. And when would you have a surplus in this case? Let's say you want to do 2 gigawatts steady. Let's say you have an aluminium smelter and you want to run it steady 2 gigawatts throughout the year. You will have some spare electricity coming out in the summer. That's right. That's exactly when you need it for air conditioning. So you can team a steady load along with your varying, say, residential or building load. You have a very good proposition.
So the missing capacity factor is at gas, or that we're assuming a backup,
2%, let's say,
or the 11%.
Or the 11, if you're doing if you want 3 gigawatts, gas, nuclear, or as demand management, or you just you try and work around that. You schedule maintenance and so on for the low demand periods. There's various options. So that's, for example, of an industrial load, but of course, the export, you could also have a 2 gigawatt export cable to somebody and use that export cable with a very high load factor.
There's also, the nuclear, the fuel replacement, it's like a month outage. So also that is a spike that you need to manage.
Yeah. But you could time that for, obviously you just look at when you're going to have a surplus and.
If they would.
Yeah. So that creates the possibility of electricity exports, and there's growing interest, I think, in globally in electricity exports. And I took a look at where this is being done currently at major HVDC, high voltage direct current cables elsewhere in the world. Look at Asia, plenty in India, which are going from big coal or hydro plants to demand centers. Even more in China, of course. And again, it's kind of going from inland locations, hydro, wind, solar, mostly in Western China. It's the coast, demand centers on the coast. And China's been a pioneer in UC connections, but not international lines. A little bit from Nepal and Bhutan into India, but this is almost entirely domestic so far. So not capturing the potential for trade between countries.
Looks like a great opportunity in the future.
Yep.
In terms of revenues you can generate from this cross-border trades.
Indeed. Where do you have high quality renewables in a country that has a surplus? Let's look at Europe. There's a lot more connectivity. This is showing that the kind of the offshore cables. There's onshore ones as well, of course, but we look at primarily the offshore ones. You have North Sea, which is kind of connecting wind power usually, or connecting Norwegian hydro to the UK, things like that. And then you have some connections like from the Balkans to Italy and so on, which are trying to connect some diverse markets. So Europe is a lot more connected, and Europe has far more electricity trade, international trade, than any other region in the world. About 5% of European electricity is traded cross-border. Any other part of the world, it is less than 1%. So 5% is still maybe not much, but it's more than anywhere else. Obviously facilitated by the EU and the single market. And we will see a lot more of this, particularly around the North Sea. So at least this kind of concept does exist and does work in a place that has a common market framework. GCC is a different story. So there is a GCC interconnection, which is in the red here, and it connects all the 6 GCC countries. It's been operating for more than 10 years, and in a technical sense, successfully. It's being extended. So there is firstly a connection in the south. You'll see it goes directly through Abu Dhabi to Oman. So Oman was not directly connected to the GCC interconnection previously, only through the UAE grid. Now there'll be a direct connection. A strengthening of the connection to Kuwait. Talk about that, why that is in a moment. And the connection being built into Iraq, which is supposed to start the first half of next year.
The blue colors, does this indicate different projects, timings?
So the red is existing, and that is the original GCC interconnection. The dark blue is the new connection to Oman, the direct connection, which is under construction. Perhaps it's already started. And then the orange is the link to Iraq, which is should start first half of next year. Future potential to link to Jordan and Egypt, and Saudi actually is constructing its own link to Egypt, so the kind of link to the GCC, but through the Saudi system, and maybe other additional connections to Iraq, maybe other things in the region. So, in the technical point of view, the backbone is there. Now let's kind of look at how this thing actually works in practice. So the GCC Interconnection Authority, they estimate how much savings there's been from the interconnection year by year, millions of dollars. And you'll see, it's been kind of going up and down. It hovers around 200 million per year over this time. And that is mostly from reducing capacity and reserve requirements and emergency backup. And about half of that came from CO2 reductions. They're not very clear on their methodology. How do they estimate that? I mean, there isn't any carbon price in the Gulf.
That would have been my question to you. Based on what?
They don't really explain. I mean, there must be some kind of shadow pricing they're using, but what value they use, it's not clear.
What happened in 2024?
Now that's where it gets interesting. In 2024, you can see the value jumps up dramatically, and that is Kuwait. So Kuwait is short of power, and Kuwait's, please can we boost the capacity, and can we buy a lot more from the GCC? So this is kind of the first time that the grid has been used consistently as let's say a trading mechanism, and not just a balancing thing. So previously, countries were all pretty much balanced. They put in a megawatt one day, they take out a megawatt the next day. Nobody was really a big importer or exporter. In 2024, Kuwait became a big net importer, and that's going to continue. And then, of course, from 2026, we'll have Iraq should become a big net importer as well. So finally, the grid is getting used as like an actual trading mechanism, and that's why the value of the trade pretty much doubles in 2024. We don't have the 25 figures yet, but we should see even more for 25.
I mean, any idea what the Kuwaitis are paying per kilowatt hour?
Well, you know, I'm just about to answer the question.
Oh, sorry.
Well-timed question.
All right.
So this, again, GCCIA figures, they'll show you how much electricity was exchanged on just kind of a bilateral, physically settled basis in the blue versus how much was traded on a financial basis, on a paid for basis. And from 2016 onwards, as you see, well, about half the amount being traded was about half of the amount that was being settled physically. 2024, that all jumped up. So a big increase in the amount that was exchanged, but also the amount that was being settled in money. And if you do the numbers, it's settled at $124 a megawatt hour.
But previously it was only Abu Dhabi, Saudi, right? And because it's also Abu Dhabi to Kuwait, or is there others involved in this trade?
No, the whole connection. So everybody was trading with everybody, even Kuwait. Right? Anybody could, in a principle, Kuwait could say, "Yeah, I want a megawatt from Oman," right? And find its way through the grid. But they were not, let's say, buying large quantities systematically.
But I thought there was like this 300 megawatt with Saudi and the UAE or Abu Dhabi.
Of trade.
Well, that was like the commercial contract, 300 megawatts, and then they could just basically buy up to that. That was
yeah. I mean, there was some trading.
Yeah.
There was some amount that was being settled financially. Yes. But the price is kind of interesting. So the price that the GCCIA reports is $124 a megawatt hour, which is quite expensive. Now again, and this price has remained the same since 2016. So no indication of how that price has arrived at, or is it based on generation costs? Probably not. Sounds too high. Is it based on value of lost load or something? So it's not a market price anyway. I think we can say that, and it has not changed since 2016. It's been exactly constant every year.
So from my understanding, so basically, I mean, if there's, let's say, a maintenance outage, you get some megawatt hours from your neighbor. I thought typically you have to sort of give the megawatt hours back within 6 weeks or something, right? Then this trading is, if you just don't want to do that, you just pay. Is that how that works?
Yes.
Okay, but then, yeah, but I think there was like a commercial contract for 300 megawatts between Abu Dhabi and Saudis, and of course the Kuwaitis have been coming here because they're on a real pickle over the summer.
Exactly. Yeah.
So that's then outside of that, let's say, regular settlement, which is that fixed price that is probably prohibitive.
Yeah.
I was going to say that 124 megawatt hours is pretty close to Kuwait's cost of generation, all in. Maybe it's
because they're generating from oil.
Yeah.
And they're heavy oil.
Yeah. So they're, it's pretty. Maybe it's based around
Them it may,
what they're already paying.
It may actually make sense for.
Yeah.
Quick question. What's the source of the volume that's on the chart? If you go back and
It's all the GCCIA data.
Just speak a bit up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. And the number, is that also the price? Is that coming from GCCIA as well? Because
Yes,
most
they don't report the price, but you can calculate it from the figures.
okay, because most of the trades are in-kind trade in the region, aren't they? They're not really
Right.
cash.
Right. But if you look at what's reported for the cash settled trades versus the volumes, it gives you the price.
And okay, and because I know they use something called GEMS, I think, for their trades, and not all the trades go through that system. So is that, you think that it's covering all the trades or just those?
They're reporting a number, and the number is, the price is exactly constant. So from 2016 to the present day, 2024.
Yeah.
So this is not if there's other deals being done outside that at some kind of a bilateral price, then that's not shown. And that could be something.
Do you think that includes because it could be that it's just one big trade, which was with Iraq, and that could be that. It's just because of, which would explain why the price is fixed.
Yeah, but they're only connected to Iraq. I mean, the Iraq connection is not even, maybe it's kind of ready or not done yet. It'll be ready at the start of next year. So the numbers here are just intra GCC trade so far. Now, if people are doing other deals, the Saudis have this connection to Egypt or something, if there's other stuff not in the GCCIA, I mean, that could be any price, of course. And you know, when are people trading? Well, you know, not surprisingly, it's predominantly in summer. So, and we saw the all-time peak was in August 24. So it probably was even a bigger peak this year when they get around to updating the figures. So particularly Kuwait, of course, importing summer electricity. Now, there's a lot more that can be done with this connection, and this is one study that was done by Qamar, looking at a 2030 situation. They said what happens when we have a lot more renewables by 2030 and have built some extra connections when we have a connection to Egypt and Jordan and so on as well. What is the kind of the optimal pattern of trade between the countries? And you see what they've shown here is basically the blue arrow is trade going one way. The black arrow is trade going the other way. So it's kind of, you could have flows going from one country to another in summer and reversing direction in winter or whatever, depending on renewable output and demand patterns. Tends to be, you know, most of the links tend to go mostly one way. But if you look at Egypt, Saudi, for example, it's quite balanced. You know, 19% kind of goes one way and 12% the other way. And in this view, they really saw Saudi as being the big exporter because of its by 2030 it's very large renewable capacity. So kind of Saudi dominates the exports. Iraq and Kuwait dominate the imports. Everybody else kind of more or less balanced. Of course, every year they put a bid in and take a bid out. But they calculated this offers $1.1 billion of savings by 2030, annual savings, and a gross trade of 55 terawatt hours. So
that's savings in terms of capital that could otherwise be spent to build.
Capital and operating costs.
Production that wouldn't be built.
Right. So either capital for renewables that don't, or gas-fired power that doesn't have to be built, or savings in fuel.
And based on the data you have, Saudi's only export. There's no import going to Saudi Arabia.
Well, this is a study. It's kind of theoretical. This is a study.
Okay.
They do import a bit. I mean, you can see from the GCC grid, for example, mostly Saudis are exporting to the GCC grid, but 4% of the time they're importing. So there's some going into Saudi and some coming in from Egypt into Saudi at certain times. So there's obviously a daytime pattern, of course, when Egypt is whatever an hour behind Saudi. So evening time, you could still get solar from Egypt going into Saudi.
Egypt, the very new link, is that what you're referring to?
There's a 3 gigawatt link, which is under maybe finished now or at least under construction. But this study allows for new links. This is kind of theoretical. So this would allows for construction of new links between all the countries there. So that's kind of regional, GCC and immediate neighbours. But there's also the opportunity for longer distance connections. And I'll just address a couple of them here. This is the thought of a link to India, and this all ties into the IMEC program, which is kind of the India, Middle East, Europe corridor, which is a whole program of connectivity of energy and ports and railways and all this kind of stuff. But electricity is perhaps a significant part of it, and there's a concept for undersea DC cable running to Mumbai or Gujarat. And bringing in power. So probably the power in this case is flowing primarily GCC to India, but it could also go the other way at certain times. And this is technically probably getting towards the boundaries of what is being done in terms of length and water depth, but feasible and realizing benefits from sharing renewables with India. Possibly bringing Indian renewables into the GCC at certain times as well.
But it looks like it's there are only small parts of infrastructure missing.
Which I remember.
At your map, where you
Yeah.
It's only very short distances that where you line would be missing.
Right, so it's about 1,300 kilometers from Fujairah or Oman, let's say, to India. So that's That's a long
No,
cable.
I mean, on the
Oh, the Arabian side. Yeah, I mean, there's different things here because this map is also showing you railways and all kind of stuff as well. So not everything here is electricity. The electricity, of course, Saudi has a grid obviously that covers the whole country and then links into Egypt. But the link to India would be focusing on. Well, I've got a question: who serves it? Is it mostly Saudi exports or UAE or Oman or a mix of all of those?
India has a lot of capacity which they can't use also, so they would be able to export actually.
Really? Yes.
Renewable,
Yes.
or at least coming up, but it will be too much.
Yes.
Cost of the line, $5 billion of the undersea cable.
Yeah.
For 3 gigawatts about, yeah.
So it's a big project, but not a crazy one.
I'm sorry, is it estimated at 5 billion for over 1,200 kilometers?
That's my oversystem own calculation. I was just asked the question 1 week ago.
I'm sorry, I just did an estimate for the Mediterranean. That's
It's cheaper in the Mediterranean, but shorter.
Yeah.
But the big cost factor is the end station.
Yes.
So a very short connection actually is also very expensive.
Yeah, and indeed, you mentioned the overcapacity or the surplus capacity at various times. So we look at a typical solar plant in Gujarat versus one in Neom in Saudi Arabia. I mean, the Gujarat, of course, is generally less in the monsoon season, July through to October. And Neom is steadier through the year, but a bit lower in winter, of course. So, overall, there's clearly periods when, one would be exporting to the other or vice versa. There's clearly some synergies here. And if you planned it out a bit more and you included wind resources and stuff as well, India has a lot of hydro as well, some storage capacity. You can see that there's could be a lot of complementarity.
Are we allowed to ask questions or is it afterwards? So apologies, because
No, feel free to jump in.
So Neom, obviously there's nothing there at the moment. So where is that coming from? There's no physical infrastructure.
Okay, so this is again a theoretical.
Okay.
This is if I built a solar plant in Gujarat, this is real data from a real year, but for like a theoretical plant.
Okay.
But Neom actually, they're building a hydrogen facility which will be operational next year, so there is already a lot of solar and wind capacity on the ground there today. There's not much else in Neom, and as we know,
But that's off grid, right? So that's the solar farm and the wind farm which are connected to that. And there's a grid connection which has gone live, 1 gigawatt. But
I mean, the connection to Egypt runs pretty close to Neom.
that's okay. But again, it's theoretical. Sorry, because it's not live yet. The Egyptian connection is well.
Of course, this is theoretical. It's just saying. Let's say I wanted to trade electricity between Saudi and
Okay.
India, and I put a big solar plant in each one. How do they?
Last question.
I think that it's an option for Neom to actually export electricity to Egypt.
To Egypt? Sure.
But physically, Neom is not connected to that transmission line. So it will be basically the SPPC of the Saudi Arabia, the single buyer and seller. So Neom is actually not really hooked into that transmission line with Krane into Egypt.
It is not that. But there's nothing to stop you. It doesn't stop the Saudis. There's 1 million acres of desert there, right? There's nothing to stop them putting a big solar or wind farm there to supply their grid or the Egyptian grid or whatever.
It's all possible, but yeah, but that's not part of the plan.
So that's all the electricity that is being generated in Neom then used for the hydrogen production.
At the moment, yes, and it's all off grid. There is a BSP connection, bulk supply point connection, which has gone live and energized, but there's no offtake at the moment. But that is supposed to supply NGHC. And if that data center goes live, the data vault publicly announced. So those are the two big demand centers. Obviously,
They have created the demand center for production that is being built.
yes, the one which is certainly is NGHC, a new green hydrogen company, which will connect to grid, and it's about 80% or whatever to comply with RED 3 obligations for green hydrogen. They'll be producing their own from Gayal and Shikri. These are solar wind farms and wind solar and wind farms, which will supply green hydrogen.
With the lack of a grid connection, that's because they don't want to contaminate that hydrogen. They don't want to put a green export label on it, and if there's any connection to the existing grid,
Yeah.
then they can't really claim it's green anymore, right? So,
Well, the idea is exactly to
Idea.
comply with RED 3, RED 2 and RED 3, and
Okay.
that allows NGHC to import a certain percentage, a small percentage from grid, which can be grey power.
okay,
So it will be grey power, anything that's connecting to grid. The rest needs to come from the off-grid, I think 1.2 solar and 1.5 wind. That is very larger.
okay.
That's definitely happening in the next few months and maybe years. My question was actually you mentioned the flows that you've designed. Are they physical physics related flows or commercial flows from what you've modeled there?
From the example like 3 slides ago, the one of the flow from Saudi and Egypt and stuff. So the study, it was a CAPSARC study of Saudi research. Those are commercially based, right? So they're assuming that you've built a certain amount of infrastructure that allows physical flows. Obviously, a lot of that infrastructure is not there today. It's saying if you build some optimal infrastructure, what would the usage pattern of it look like? Who's exporting to who?
Yeah, because the reason why I say that, because even in Europe, which is the most integrated market, with single energy market, you see loops, even though the physical trade might be between, say, Netherlands and Belgium, but the flow is actually physics dictates the flow, and it loops through Belgium back into Germany and back in there. So it doesn't match always what's actually physically being traded.
Sure.
Not all the time, at least.
Yeah. So that was the India example. I showed another one. This is a study that we did last year on connectivity from the Levant region into Europe. And this is kind of, I guess by way of background, this was part of kind of peace building efforts around Gaza to say, okay, in a post-conflict situation, what can be done to build some common infrastructure that creates some dynamic or some security towards peace and cooperation between the countries here, between Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Egypt. And we looked at electricity export from that region, so solar and wind generation in the Egypt, Jordan, northern Saudi Arabia area, through Israel and Palestine to Cyprus and Greece and Italy, and therefore and on from there to the rest of Europe. And this again demonstrates very well that yes, this is economically is an attractive project. You can deliver solar and wind power on a steady basis competitively to Europe, and even allowing for the cost of the line and the batteries and everything else. So that was there's a lot more detail behind that in the report. There's just a bit of an illustration. I've talked mainly about electricity. I will just briefly address hydrogen, because if you have a surplus of low-cost energy, you could make electricity, you can make hydrogen, you can make ammonia and other derivatives, of course. And we know hydrogen's been through its cycles of excitement and disappointment. This shows a view of kind of plans for hydrogen export from or hydrogen production from the region by the country. Now, these plans are pretty clear; they're not going to happen at this scale and on this time frame. If we put this back a few years, this is, I guess, what still could happen if the commercial rationale is there. So pretty significant hydrogen production and export up to 20 million tons a year or more. Now, the big problem is there's the market that's now almost nobody has been willing to pay sufficient prices to build these low carbon hydrogen projects. NEOM will happen, pretty much ready to be up and running. The Omani projects, a few of them got culled recently, but several of the other Omani projects are still moving ahead. So we'll see some version of this on a slightly smaller scale. But there's the question there is, okay, what's the balance of electricity exports versus hydrogen exports versus local use of hydrogen for steel and ammonia and other industries, whether those green materials then used locally or exported as a kind of a hydrogen proxy. And in the longer term, there is this potential, as we see, for green-based industrialization in the region through hydrogen and carbon dioxide hubs, which have a combination of heavy industry, renewable energy production, CO2 use or storage, hydrogen production, and then all the derivatives around hydrogen. And if you look at the UAE, you have perhaps 4 clusters. You have kind of Ruwais cluster out of the west. You have the Abu Dhabi region. You have a Dubai. And you've got like a Northern Emirates, Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah cluster. And maybe I didn't show it, but maybe a Fujairah cluster, where you get synergies from bringing all of these facilities together. You have marine facilities, you have energy storage, hydrogen storage, batteries, everything in one spot. And you can decarbonize the steel sector, the aluminium sector, and so on that way.
But doesn't this make the case for a national hydrogen market?
National or international, yeah. You know, there are moves towards that, right? And probably Oman is the most advanced in that regard, also in terms of planning for the infrastructure. But indeed, yes, if you want to have a proper commercial case for hydrogen, you need some kind of a market.
The ports or the terminals, are they already under development or under plan, or are these just preferred locations in the event that they do happen?
So I showed these because these already exist as ports, right? I mean, there's all major ports today, and they have a lot of energy infrastructure and industry and stuff around them already. Some of that maybe is kind of adaptable for hydrogen. I guess the one that's most advanced in actually doing stuff for hydrogen is Khalifa Port and Kazad. You know, they had preparatory work for hydrogen facilities and related stuff like methanol. So yes,
in Ruwais, right? I mean, Alvario is building ammonia tanks.
True. Yeah. And if you go to the next section, it's almost like that slide. And this is Duqm in Oman, which absolutely is very actively developing the kind of whole hydrogen base and storage and industry and so on. So we'll see where this goes, but at least the kind of latest Oman Hydrogen Conference is still reasonably optimistic on this. So yeah, and then in conclusion, I mean, the opportunity is very clearly there. Ultra cheap renewables on a large scale, plus batteries, steady output, whether that's for electricity exports or hydrogen or all of that stuff. Electricity exchange with neighbours. There is certainly billions of dollars of value to be generated or saved from trade just within the GCC. Even more on exports to the near neighbours, and maybe long distance exports to India, Europe, and so on. One of the challenges, well, from an economic point of view, electricity exports and hydrogen exports, they don't generate large rents, unlike oil and gas. So it's hard to make them the foundation for a rentier-based economy. They can be valuable, but they're not generating huge surplus profits. There are political barriers to interconnections, even within the GCC. You can see that the case for saving on infrastructure is so clear, and yet even the GCCIA is limited on size and usage. People don't want to depend on their neighbours. You know, it's only a couple of years ago that we had the embargo against Qatar, and I'm sure the Qataris think, well, what if we'd been relying on our neighbours for like half of our power at that point, and they decided to turn it off. So all this kind of political worries, and even more so if you talk about links to the other neighbouring countries.
But don't they understand that it would be security of supply if they better it?
And increases your physical security and reliability and against natural disasters, those kind of stuff, absolutely.
But even in Europe, people have to be forced to trade with their neighbors more than anything. The Commission is actively forced to because of the systemic, advantages. But people,
I mean, look at Spain.
Of their country first.
Look at Spain and France. Almost no interconnection between Spain and France. EU members, good friends, whatever. Spain, full of excellent renewables. Almost no interconnection.
It's like Texas. We have no interconnection with the rest.
Getting better. Yeah.
Well, not much, right? Very small.
Would it be prohibitive if they did pursue both strategies, so maximum interconnection, but also maximum self-sufficiency, or at least to a degree, so that they can neutralize that issue of being cut off?
Yeah, I mean, there are still savings. You can keep all your gas-fired plants in reserve and say, okay, I'll rely on my neighbours for the solar and the wind, and I'll have the gas if I ever need it. Then you get, I suppose half the savings that you would have got. So, yeah.
So 3 gigawatts of capacity doesn't sound very big. What is used capacity in average? Because the Northlink in Germany, Norway, were totally complementary, is only used by 50%.
Don't recall the figure on the GCCIA usage. I can easily check it. But the electricity trade within the GCC is about 0.8% of total generation. So it is tiny, right? And as I said, in Europe, it's 5%, and it probably should be a lot more, but that's the most trading you get in any region of the world. I mean, 0.8% is okay, fine. You can see your $200 million or your $500 million of savings, $500 million of savings spread over the whole GCC.
Yeah.
But even the capacity between Abu Dhabi and Saudi is what effectively 1 gigawatt. So even that is, so you get 5.6 gigawatts of nukes and right at the border, nowhere to go.
Yes, and meanwhile the nukes are searching for every load that they can find in the UAE and trying to connect up.
Wow.
So yeah, and then what is most interesting for us, from the point of view of trading, right? The lack of market mechanisms. So we talk about the price. What is the GCCIA price? Why is it $124 a megawatt? What else is going on in bilateral deals behind that number? What is the market price for electricity in the GCC? There isn't one. Okay, Oman has just started to develop a trade in electricity market for a small amount of electricity. So finally, we do have an idea what is something of like a market price in Oman. But what's the market price for electricity right now in Abu Dhabi or in Kuwait? Nobody knows, right? So without that price, how can you trade, or how can you know that you're trading in a value generating way? And of course, that then relates to subsidies and non-transparent pricing. Electricity subsidies to end users, okay, that's one thing. But even in the wholesale market, what about your price of gas? Is that properly priced? Price of gas is different in every GCC country. There's very little trade between them. And even oil in Saudi, even oil power gens is still subsidized. So if the Saudis are going to export a lot of electricity to Kuwait, how do they know that actually makes sense? The price that they're receiving versus the price that they get to the oil on the open market. How do we fix this? Well, one is to build market mechanisms and trading platforms and trading opportunities, and to build on things like the Omani market, and hopefully encourage other countries to adopt similar things and connectivity. Like the European story, like Nord Pool, and how the Scandinavian countries joined up and then brought in neighbours into that bit by bit. And then to unlock value from the electricity in the hydrogen sector. So, okay, by exporting electricity, you make a little bit of money, but if you could use that to unlock green industries and new opportunities in data centers and potentially carbon trading and emissions reductions and so on, you can generate a lot more value. So that's maybe the way that you get people excited about it. It's not a $500 million opportunity, which is kind of relatively nothing. This is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. Thank you.
Robin, well brought, all the good points on paper, so to say. So are there any questions here in the room? 10 more.
Robin, thank you very much for that. That was really helpful. It's good to see the data in one place. Just out of curiosity, you mentioned a lot of trading is in summers, cross-border trading. And then you just recently mentioned the nuclear parts, So from just curious, because from what I remember, when the nukes came up, there was a lot of surplus during winters because of cogen plants running anyway, demand dropping, and then Abu Dhabi looking to push out power into Oman, into KSA. So I thought with more reactors coming online, my source of information is from 2021. Since then, more reactors came online. So I would have thought more volume was trading during winter, cross-border volume being pushed out of Abu Dhabi because of that, but the data wasn't showing that.
You do see that a little bit, right? You saw in the numbers that January, February actually. So it's like a spike in January, February, this trade.
Yeah.
Then there's nothing for a few months, and then it's summer. So you do see a bit of that. I think what's changed is, well, yes, more reactors have come online, absolutely. But demand has gone up. I mean, demand in the UAE has been very, very strong, as we know.
the water situation, there's now a lot more reverse osmosis than before, so you decouple the power from the water.
Yeah, and that was indeed, that was, of course, as we know from all the work we did together on that, that was exactly the plan. Hey, they said we're going to have a lot of inflexible load, and we don't want to be running the gas-fired plants in winter just to make water. So use the RO plants to decouple that. So, you know, a few things. Also, of course, that, you know, the nuclear plants will be going out in the UA and saying aluminium, steel, ADNOC, you know, please sign up these contracts for our conveniently low carbon power. We also need to get rid of.
So ADNOC has this massive electrification program. They're building this HVDC plant, all the oil islands, etc. So it's also.
Thank you.
Anything else? I mean, you're obviously making the argument for trading. It's what you ultimately do. So why is it not happening? You mentioned political issues. You mentioned Qatar. Let's say oil gravity is coming up. Can that be enough to prevent such a deficiency to gain momentum?
I think it's gaining momentum. It just takes time. You know, the Omani market, okay, finally there's like a real market, although it's only a small fraction of their generation so far, but okay, it's something. It's a starting point. And the exports to Kuwait. So finally you have a country that needs imports. And that also creates a driver to say what should the commercial basis of that be. And Iraq, you know, the long discussions between the GCC and Iraq for the Iraqis on what should the Iraqis pay. So people have to think hard about, okay, what's the price that the Iraqis are willing to pay versus what's my real generation costs. I think there's, you know, that understanding is selling. Yeah, it should have come a lot quicker, and you know, it's kind of frustrating that it doesn't come quicker. I think gradually those pieces are coming.
So there's light at the end of the tunnel.
But who would want to build that electricity connector with India, and why? That's the. I mean, I know they've been talking to these Indian groups, but it's fully merchant, right? And then you have to take a view on, you know, what you were showing, like the market here and the market there, and you know, what's the arbitrage, and it's, you know, it's all risk. So who's going to do that?
That I do not see that could ever work. Well, not ever. So not now. That could not work on a merchant basis. No, it has to be sovereign.
But that's what they've been trying so far. At least, you know, people have been running around with the slide deck. It's like, who wants to invest?
No. And with all the different energy, with all the different never mind the GCC, but all the different Indian power markets and people who don't pay their bills and state utilities that are bankrupt and that kind of stuff.
But that's why they were talking to the Indian groups.
Was there ever a discussion with that project to connect to Pakistan instead of India? Because that would be G to G for this region. I've never heard of it, so I don't know.
We talked about it a few years back. Maybe others talked about it.
It's politically, there's been recently some movement on that front. India was more publicly announced, but I think since the Saudis did a defense pact with Pakistanis, off the back of that discussion, they got some oil, and that interconnection is back on the agenda for GCCIA and EU. I'm actually consulting on that. So
it's actually quite actual between GCC and India.
Yeah.
They're talking in the moment about it.
Yeah, but the Indian one, do you think is that subsea the longest subsea? Is that
it would be the longest connection, but there's actually not a technical issue about that. It's possible.
Economically?
A total different.
Yeah, technically it's possible. Yeah, exactly.
But the Morocco UK, which was talked about, that would be much longer, right?
Yeah. Also Australia, Singapore is longer.
Yeah.
Lots of.
Morocco, UK has been struck, right? Because of that. I mean, technically it's possible, but economically it just.
And now it's
Well, the government wouldn't guarantee but there's no worry that technically.
But now it's Germany, Morocco, Germany. That's not that.
Yeah.
One question on my side. I mean, if the political reality changed, and because I noticed on all the maps, there's always talk about India and everything, and naturally, given the situation in Iran, would never be considered. But were there a rapid change in, say, government there, and things were more amenable? Does anyone know what the kind of demand side from that country is enormous. It's got so much potential.
And Iran has a big deficit.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the politics change, yeah, I'm sure you get the GCC connecting up to Iran, but that's
It's a long shot.
it's a long shot.
Very long shot.
I think.
There's no one's not even bothering to model that at all.
I mean, Iran used to be quite a big electricity exporter to Iraq and in fact to Pakistan and Afghanistan and so on. But now they're running short themselves.
I mean, there was a Crescent gas pipeline from Iran to Sharjah that was finished. It was tested. There was a price agreed upon, really low price, and then it's never, no flows, right? I mean, it's been sitting there dormant. It's never been used, right? So it's, I mean,
It's not
there's
official.
even infrastructure. It's so,
At least not
at least
officially.
as far as I know. Yes. Yeah. So
Right. Any other more questions to Robin? Sam?
Quick question. I'm not as much as an expert, I think, than you guys, but I just used to trade the environmental commodities linked to the assets. Question regarding the physical one. Wind being more developed in India than in the UAE, and UAE having more solar. Would it make sense economically to link both in order to exchange because they have different production, or would it make more sense to then install batteries locally to make the arbitrage locally instead of having to depend on each other?
I think every situation like that is case by case, and we've modeled several different situations in different places. It's not really a firm rule, but I think what we did see is bringing in wind certainly has a big advantage. So where you have good wind resource, like Saudi and Oman, where you have good wind resources, it certainly reduces system costs significantly. And even the UAE with not very good wind has actually built a little bit, and their modelling does show that, yeah, even that reduces system costs. So wind certainly helps. It reduces the need for the batteries. But you want them both. But exactly what balances really depends.
But it's only in the south of India, right? In the north, there's not much wind.
Okay.
So thank you very much, Robin. It was really interesting. To do this again. Now I would like to introduce you to Professor Jim Krane. Krane is a fellow of the Rice University Vegas Institute in Houston, Texas, US. Before living in the US, he spent quite some while in Japan, working in Dubai as a journalist, but then also later on went into energy geopolitics before focusing on world economies, climate change impacts, and energy transition. And we are looking forward to hear your presentation, and thank you for giving it also a local colors. You touch upon Kuwait's problem. It just quality was check.
oh, thanks. We got some slides, I think. Oh, there we are. Perfect. Well, thanks very much for having me. It's been great to be back in Abu Dhabi. I've been really enjoying the hospitality of the ZETA group here. So, as we just heard, I did live in the UAE as a journalist, worked for the AP. Also got a chance, an inside view working in the ruler's office there in Dubai, which was super useful and interesting. And I used a lot of that, those observations that weren't included in my non-disclosure agreement that in my book, right? So my Dubai book. And then since then, I went and did a PhD after that, and then wrote a second book based on my PhD findings, which is called Energy Kingdom. That, if anyone's interested in that, fantastic brain trust in this room. So, please, if I can't answer one of your questions, I'm sure there's someone in here that can. And I think my presentation is going to be maybe a little bit more pessimistic than Robin's kind of more optimistic outlook here. We're going to focus in on Kuwait. This is something that we've had two visiting fellows at the Baker Institute from Kuwait, including Salam Al-Hadra, the former electricity minister, who I've worked with on this material here. So, as we just heard a little bit about the Kuwait model of electricity provision has, is heavily subsidized, right? It creates some very damaging economic distortions. Kuwait, for instance, very wealthy country is continually running budget deficits, as we'll see here in a minute. So energy subsidies are a big part of that. They subsidize not just electricity, but also desalinated water and transportation fuels. If those subsidies go unreformed, the thinking in Kuwait is that this growing subsidy expense burden is going to force them to make some really tough choices that are probably going to heavily antagonize their citizens. So it's a bit of a tough spot. So some of the key points here that I'll hit on is the first one is that their electricity price for Kuwaiti citizens. Now, this price has been isolated, I think, since 2016, just for Kuwaiti citizens in their homes, but less than 1 US cent per kilowatt hour for 59 years now, right? It hasn't been indexed to inflation. This is as far as I can find, the 6th lowest electricity tariff in the world, and the revenues raised cover just 5% of the costs of providing that power. So in real terms, about an 800% decline over the years since it wasn't indexed to inflation. And even in the already ultra cheap electricity that's sold here in GCC, Kuwait's is only, it's less than a fifth of the average here, and the only one that beats it is Qatar, right? Where it's actually free for citizens. So so kind of we're looking at sort of the lowest of the low here. So their model of the very cheap electricity makes it really difficult to incentivize efficiency and even incentivize selling more power, right? Because every additional kilowatt hour of power that's sold is it increases the losses to the state. Pooling, of course, is the biggest part of this, right? It's 60+%. And 99% of Kuwait's power is still generated by fossil fuels. Almost no renewables still in Kuwait. So they are, really way behind and falling further behind. So they're, and a lot of the power is burned. The fuels that are burned have much higher value uses elsewhere, right? Burning oil-based fuels in the power sector is not really a value. You're not really capturing the values. Big opportunity cost for Kuwait, and that these things could be exported. And they're also dirty fuels, right? The emissions are also pretty substantial. Kuwait does have a net zero goal, so 2060 net zero goal. I mean, I don't see how they can do it with the subsidies that we're going to talk about here. It's really working at cross purposes to a lot of the government's ambitions. So in short, I think, reforms are needed. It's pretty clear. I'll talk a little bit about that toward the end, but we've got a new paper coming out on this that really digs into 3 alternate subsidy reform examples, most of which involve recasting that subsidy from in-kind electricity to either a limit on subsidized electricity that you can get, or recasting it as a cash benefit and raising the price to market levels. I think if we do that correctly, if the state is able to adopt these, one or maybe be inspired by one of our proposals, I think we'll see efficiency improvement, welfare improvement, and generating revenues for the state. I mean, Saudi Arabia has seen a little bit of this already with some of their pricing reforms. And they've got a window of opportunity right now to do this, right? Because the parliament, this sort of, the rent-seeking Kuwaiti parliament, which would, definitely not countenance any kind of a reduction in benefits for Kuwaiti citizens. That parliament has been disbanded, right? And I think, for 4 years, it's supposed to be out. So we've, since May of 2024, parliament's been out of office. So, I'm not normally an anti-democratic person, but in this case, I think it'd be much easier to do it without the parliament. Next slide, please. All right, so why do governments subsidize? I mean, this audience may not need this, but they do it for a number of reasons, right? So social welfare, industrial development are typically at the top of the list. But relief for the poor is another one, right? So, the poor spend a disproportionate amount of their income on their energy, and especially in places where, life is energy intensive. I think governments like to do this. They do it to encourage diversification, development, foreign direct investment in energy intense industries. So, also, in the early days of these subsidies, you think back, 1966 is a long time ago. Same in the rest of the GCC when they were imposing these subsidies. Governments had pretty low administrative capacity, weren't able to really differentiate among, they weren't able to means test their populations and kind of direct these subsidies in a more, equitable way. So they just made energy cheap, and that was the way they were going to share their rent windfalls. And I guess the rentier argument also here is a pointed one, right? You use these subsidies to buy public support, right, for an unelected government. So promoting social peace, et cetera. But of course, there are lots of distortions and harm, right? So I'm going to focus on, reducing wasteful consumption, but there are others as well, right? So there's lots of fuel smuggling across borders in this region. I hear about it from complaints about that from various quarters. There's also the opportunity cost issue, reduction in state revenues because these fuels are diverted into the domestic market, sold for much less. The regressive nature of the income distribution here. So benefits on subsidies always skew to the wealthy, right? An IMF study a few years back found about the richest quintile captures about 60% of energy subsidies. Encourages emissions, right? Disproportionate emissions. So Kuwait's share of global emissions is small, and we always hear our Kuwaiti friends talking about their share is less than 0.3%, so 0.29%. But that's double its share of global GDP, and that's 5 times its share of the global population, right? So, its population is also small. So on a per capita basis, it's about 25 tons of CO2 per person in Kuwait versus about 15 in the US. So, we're pretty, emissions intense, but not as much as some of the countries around here. And the power sector is where most of this comes from. That's the largest sector. So that's sort of the broader story. So I've got some data slides here. So let's look at some of these. So this one shows installed capacity and annual generation, and you can see that the demand is the red line there. Growing faster than installed capacity right now. So the installed capacity is sort of stalled, and it's supposed to pick up here, 2026 to 2028, and then we'll be back above the demand line here and have supposedly a decent reserve margin if this is an accurate depiction of that. But what Robin was showing, the big boom in GCCIA trading, coincides with that demand line being above the installed capacity, right? The production being above installed capacity. So that's where blackouts, but also imports come in. Next, sorry.
Have they announced what they're going to install for power generation? Is it natural gas?
Yeah, natural gas and solar. So a lot of natural gas, and then I think El Zor power plant's having an expansion, and then there's some solar coming on, and maybe a few more. I have it on my laptop if you want the specifics.
And the demand growth, is that primarily due to population growth, or are they actually successfully kind of diversifying?
I don't know, actually. I'm not sure what accounts for the demand growth here. So I don't have that. It's not in the paper that I did. So I'm not sure where that's all coming from. So sorry. Well, it's a fairly steady amount of demand growth. And it's not a high, so that's actually power production. But demand, the last slide in here, I'll show you the demand. It's not a steep growth in demand. It's probably 2 to 4% a year.
It's foreseeable.
So, it is foreseeable.
Why is that foreseeable?
For sure. Yeah. But again, I'll talk a little bit about this. I think it'll make more sense when I talk about the utilities. The Ministry of Electricity and Water. costs are going up and their budget is being cut, right? So they have, not a huge incentive to try and, build out a lot more generation. All right, next slide, please. All right, so if you look at per capita power demand, Kuwait is that black line. Sorry, it's really small text at the bottom there, but Kuwait is the black line at the top. Qatar is the purple line just below it, right? And then you've got the OECD average is in red, sort of if you go all the way to 2024, that's the lowest number. US is in purple, UAE is in orange, Saudi Arabia is in light blue. So Kuwait really is kind of leading them all, right? So double the OECD average, double Oman in green there. It used to be 3 or 4 times Oman. So really, really high per capita power demand in Kuwait. And again, most of this is in the residential sector.
Is there an expectation, and it might not be part of what your research was on, but is there an expectation that Saudi's demand is going to continue to increase at a larger rate in Kuwait because its population is getting wealthier?
I'll show you the Saudi demand. I've got a slide, and the last slide I think is Kuwait and Saudi compared. So yeah, they're non-residential demand, or their overall power demand in Saudi is going up a lot. They're building a lot of giga projects that a lot of them are involving housing and also power hungry developments. So I think more of that is in the commercial space than it is in the residential sector. But we'll have a quick look at that towards the end of this talk. All right, so costs. So these are fuel costs here, these blue bars going back to 2000, and the red line just shows the accumulated total that the government has spent on fuel for power generation in Kuwait. So we're at 120 billion. 120 billion is a lot of money for a small country of about 5 million people. That is a lot of money spent on power. That very little of that is captured in in bill collection, right, from the power sector. The growth is, power demand growth is coming. I mean, expect that that $120 billion to keep climbing, right? I mean, this is this is sort of illustrates how problematic this is for the government, for a government trying to do something else besides wanting to free up some of its revenue to diversify an economy or spend on education or whatever it wants to, is stuck with this big burden, big cost center. So the power mix, one of the reasons their costs are so high is because liquids, so the gas wedge is, about 64%. That's the light blue. All those other wedges are liquid fuels based around oil, right? So including crude oil and a little bit of diesel in there. So they're more valuable fuels, almost 40%. Some of that gas is imported as LNG. So Kuwait's been a net gas importer since 2008. And it's creeping up year by year. They've got a permanent LNG import terminal now. Now they did just find KPC did just find a pretty large offshore gas field that should help with some of this, to reduce some of those, the LNG imports and some of the liquids. Next slide. All right, so this is the year by year the cost of power in those bars, right, split up between production, distribution, and fuel. And the lines, the horizontal lines, are the tariffs for the different consumption groups, right? So power costs about 10 to 15 cents per kilowatt hour to generate, right? Or 100 to 150 a megawatt hour. So Robin's a figure of those GCCIA exports. We're right in this ballpark, right? So maybe they were looking at who knows? Maybe their cost had something to do with it. Sales price, obviously a small fraction of cost. You can see in 2016, there was a tariff reform that did go through for less politically sensitive sectors, all of which are smaller than the Kuwaiti citizen residential sector, right? So, the government is charging itself the most. Okay, industry now is higher than the Kuwaiti residential sector, and then the commercial tariff, that's mainly apartment buildings where expats live, right? And there's now a higher. Actually, and that is causing this interesting backlash. So lots of expats now are paying a premium. So Kuwaitis are splitting up, if you own 2 homes or whatever, they'll split up a villa into apartments and then rent to expats so they can, enjoy the lower utility bills, and the Kuwaiti can maximize the rent take because you can rent it at a premium because the utility costs are cheaper.
And they do Bitcoin buying and all those bills. I heard that's a massive problem.
It is, yeah. There's a couple of things like
They're
that.
shutting them down, like they're doing all these electricity audits.
That's right. Yeah.
There's a Bitcoin.
It's wild. Yeah. So there's another business that's using God, what is it? Some caustic soda or some kind of business. I forget somebody told me about this. There's sort of a dodgy use of almost free residential power to make some ridiculously expensive export. And I'm forgetting what it is now. But anyway, yeah. So there's lots of abuse. Yeah. So fuel is about 55% of the cost, right? The residential sector is the largest, right, with the lowest price. Is that a coincidence, or I suspect probably not. But 55% of the cost is fuel. The Ministry of Electricity and Water uses international prices to calculate its fuel costs, right? These are only tallied on the balance sheets. There are no payments actually made, but since the fuel is provided by the states or by KPC, the utilities, the ministry doesn't really have an incentive to use cheaper fuels or cheaper sources of power generation. I mean, their main mandate is just to keep to meet demand. So with some restructuring of some of the incentives, they could be pushed to use cheap solar, build out more of that, and we think that will be forthcoming soon. So the power sector costs are increasing. They've been going up about 6% a year since 2011, and the most recent year we have data for, the costs are about $3,200 per capita in Kuwait, or about $16,000 for the average family of 5. But the ministry's budget, the electricity ministry's budget, has been declining by about 2.5% a year. And it's down now from about 11 billion in about 5 years ago to about 7.5 billion US dollars now. So reduced wherewithal. And if that weren't bad enough, the state is also very lax in even collecting the small tariff. The small amount of revenue that is due it, right? So this very lax bill collection contributes to this notion in Kuwait that cheap or free power is a right of citizenship. I mean, Kuwaitis are supposed to be paying for their power. They've got there's smartphone apps that help them do this, but enforcement is just super weak. In some years, yeah, I mean, the ministry has more uncollected revenue than it does actually revenue that it collects. So about average about 130% of the collected revenues was still was in arrears, right? So, and it's not just Kuwaiti citizens in their homes that aren't paying. Actually, commercial customers and even the government is sometimes not paying. They can't collect from their, from within the government. So there's some serious dysfunction going on here. Now, you can see there's some improvement in revenue collection. It's been going up, a few percent a year. And a relatively new ministry declaration decree has said that people can be disconnected for non-payment, but in practice, it's never happened. And I don't think, it probably won't happen. Now we've got smart meters rolling out in Kuwait, and I'll show you a little bit of data from that. So there's a little bit more granularity on consumption patterns, and things like Bitcoin mining are going to pop up, I think, a little bit more readily. But enforcement is still problematic. Okay. All right. All right. So this is government revenues and expenditures. Going back 10 years or so. You can see the deficit is in the is the red bar. So 9 out of these 10 years, there was a debt. Kuwait, wealthy Kuwait was running a budget deficit, and you can see the subsidies in green. So the energy subsidies bar there. In some years it's pretty close to the same size as the actual deficit. It's a key part of why the Kuwaiti government is running deficits. State obviously wants to convert this deficit into income and make itself much better off. So and that's what we're trying to help them do. So this is the smart meter data that we were able to get. So my colleague Salam Al-Hadrif, former minister, was able to get this. He got it from I think he gets some accounts data from about 600 accounts and cleaned up the data and was able to get 185 of them for the full year, and a pretty big variation. You can see in consumption. The low end is like around 100,000 kilowatt hours a year, maybe a couple houses there a little bit less. High end, way up to and above even 400,000 kilowatt hours for a single home. Okay, this is a family home, which is just it's an incredible amount. So the sort of the center of this is 200,000 to 250,000 kilowatt hours a year, about a third of this. So if you think about if you want to a similar environment in the U.S., Arizona. Okay, so if it's sort of like controlling for income and temperature, although incomes are a bit lower and temperatures are a bit lower. Arizona is at about 15,000 kilowatt hours per year, or actually 20. So U.S. is at 15. Arizona is about 20. Okay, Norway uses a lot of electric heating and electric transport. They're at about 27,000. So way down at the bottom of that stack, below the lowest of the low, less than half of the lowest one on there is Arizona and Norway. So really, now not a perfect comparison, right? Because these are, the wealthy end of the residential market.
So the high end gym is using 45 kilowatts continuously.
Yeah.
That's your Bitcoin mine.
That's a mine.
Yeah.
It could be. So some of those, really, really long bars or tall bars are, I don't know how they could use that in a house with just lighting.
Even a big house. What's a big house?
So,
AC can maybe 10 kilowatts.
yeah. So
If you have 30 kilowatts
you got a lot of
Bitcoin,
computer
you need
servers.
30 kilowatts of AC also.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, So it's a. I'm gonna get that in that paper. Actually, I'm still working on this paper. Next slide. Yeah. So how much would a Kuwaiti citizen residential customer, sort of a large customer, we looked at here? I'm not sure why Solomon pulled out this number here, but he's looking at a really big residential customer using 340,000 kilowatt hours. How much would they pay if they were in the rest of the GCC? So a bill, that annual bill for that much power cost the Kuwaiti, about $2,200 for the whole year. Okay. If that person was in Bahrain, it would have been about 13,000. In Oman, it would have been about 25,000, right? In Qatar, about $82. I think that's just a connection fee for a Qatari citizen. But then, it goes up from there, right? So $25,000 in Saudi Arabia. And if you look at, Abu Dhabi is the other kind of outlier here, really low, about $7,000 in Abu Dhabi National would have paid for that much power. So that's where probably the main similarity. And then Dubai, look at that, $33,000. I'm thinking that's probably the expat tariff that Solomon used for this, not the citizen tariff in Dubai, right?
Striking difference in one country to have these numbers.
Isn't it? Yeah. So I think the Abu Dhabi tariff is probably the nationals tariff, and the Dubai one is probably the expat.
The difference is not that national to national or expat to expat.
Similar.
I think it's about twice. Abu Dhabi is still about twice, but it's not as big. Yeah.
Between
But Dubai, Abu Dhabi, like for like, is about 2 to 1.
2 to 1 expat to citizen or
Expat to expat.
okay. And this got it. Okay.
But does this include the villa penalty that you have, which is also paid through the electricity bill?
No.
In Abu Dhabi, we have villa penalty.
Yeah. You mean for rentals?
Or no, it's
is
it's on top of the electricity bill. It's they introduced it's like a couple $100 a month.
Oh, is that right? No, I don't think it includes that, and it doesn't include the rental fee in Dubai. So the sort of council tax.
So you're privileged if you move into an apartment.
And it's cheaper, yeah. You don't pay that.
Wow. Do Emiratis pay that, or is it just expats?
No, it's
Expats who live in a villa. Okay. Huh. All right. Next one. Okay. So, back on the last slide. So I just wanted to point out something real quick. But so the orange line at the bottom, Kuwait, you can see that the sort of the monthly expenses don't really fluctuate very much, unlike the demand, sort of very peaky, summer demand. So they're not getting price signals in Kuwait, that would, relative to the amount of power that they're using. The price signal is almost non-existent, right? So there's nothing telling people to start moderating demand, through their bills. Okay, whoops, there we go. All right, so this shows you the difference. We broke up that group on the previous slide, the residential power consumers, into 4 different groups based on their consumption. And this shows you how much they're saving on their power bills, right? Which is almost all of it. So their tariff, assessed tariff is in that sort of tiny little triangle at the very bottom of these bars. And then the government's cost is the red dot at the top. And so the gap between them in that brackets, that shows the size of their subsidy that they're getting from the government, right? So, this is regressive, right? So the rich are getting, $45,000, big consumers, $45,000 a subsidy value, whereas the lower consumers, less than half, about $20,000 subsidy, right? So, this is, if you assume that the bigger consumer is the wealthy, this is a sort of typical, subsidy capture by, the highest income group. So a more progressive tariff structure would, at minimum, reverse this, right? At least get, give the larger subsidy to the lower income group. And, beyond that, you'd want to reward efficiency. What this is doing is rewarding, I don't know if you can call it gluttony, but it's rewarding, the opposite of efficiency. It's rewarding inefficiency, right? It's just that the incentive structure is basically backwards on a number of accounts. All right, so this is something we're still working on, and that hopefully we'll have it out soonish. So we originally did a paper on the distortions, and now we're looking at proposing a few, alternative tariff structures. So these, these bars show you the cost on the left-hand side, and then 3 scenarios. And the first scenario is broken up into 4, and then and these are where the one that we're concentrating on is that third one where the government is recovering about 70% of the cost. So that is the one where Kuwaiti households would get a cash payment. So if you go back to the previous slide, sorry, equal to about 200,000 kilowatt hours per year. So about 20 to 25,000, maybe $30,000 cash payment to every Kuwaiti household, regardless, split up, with a rising amount in the summer months and a lower amount. So you can use that, go forward. You can use that to pay your bill, or you can, and if you're consuming more than 200,000 kilowatt hours, it won't cover your full bill, right? So and then and you're going to be paying, the electricity price would change to a cost reflective tariff, right? So you'd use that. So the people in the lower consumption brackets would be able to pay all of their for all their power, and they have a small bit left over. The folks that were in the higher consumption brackets would wind up paying a substantial amount at the full cost of power, because that subsidy wouldn't cover their full consumption. But all of those groups would get a signal that the more efficient their consumption is, the more of that tariff that they can pocket and hang on to.
Is the Kuwaiti government actually considering implementing that?
So we were just talking to them about this last week. So we had two meetings up in Kuwait, and it was a bit contentious. Yeah, so they are looking at this. We haven't given them this yet. I mean, we're about to, but we've given them a previous paper that has these scenarios synopsized. So we were in a meeting, a closed door meeting with, the ministry, and with KISR and KFAS and KPC, so the research organizations and the NOC. Mostly, there was pretty strong agreement that that we need to do this, but there were some folks being saying that actually you can't really just impose this now because the parliament is out, and try to capture on that. That would be, I think the Kuwaiti citizens would not be okay with that. The government pushing something through that really deeply affects their well-being, their financial well-being. There were some, one person saying, that this couldn't be done until Parliament comes back. Others were, we were saying that, well, Parliament wouldn't do this, but if it were done behind their backs, they might be okay with it because they wouldn't have had to sign off on it, and then they could just say, oh, they could shed blame for the whole, So basically, the head of state would take the hit. Could he withstand that? If it's designed properly, maybe. One person said, instead of doing all of this, what Kuwait should do is buy every Kuwaiti an airline ticket every summer to basically leave the country, and make sure they turn off their power to their villas, and get them out of the country, and that will fix everything, right? Right. Yeah. So this person was pretty adamant that was the cheapest thing to do, to just get people out of the country. So yeah, in Kuwait especially, when I was doing my PhD, I had a GCC wide survey about people's perception of their rights to cheap or free energy as a citizen, and people's willingness to pay more. And Kuwait always had the lowest acceptance of this, that they really think it's their right, and no, they're really not willing to pay more. They were like the most kind of, rentier, advocates for, kind of the system as it is now. So I think it would be tough to push it through as, without some substantial, quid pro quo, right? So Saudi, let me show you the next slide, then I'll tell you. So this is kind of a comparison of just looking at breaking out residential power demand in Saudi and Kuwait. This is the residential lines in red, and then the entire national power consumption's the blue line. So Saudi on the left has had 2 tariff reforms, one in 2016 and one in 2018, that have raised even residential prices for Saudi citizens in their own homes, right? So actually, they just raised power prices again this year by 12%, unannounced, right? They just kind of slipped an increase into everybody's bill. But you can see that residential sector in Saudi has flattened and went down, after that, especially after the 2016 reform, temporarily, right? Whereas the Kuwait residential sector that hasn't, where only the expat sector has been, 2016 had their power price go up. You see a little flattening there, on the red line on the right after 2016, but it keeps going up. So, there is some evidence that power demand is a little bit price elastic in the Gulf. I mean, these aren't huge increases, but so there's some price elasticity there that, and I think with the right incentive structure, you could probably get people, especially if there was a cash benefit, you could probably get people to, use the power at least more efficiently, maybe, put in some wall cavity insulation or better windows or controlled technology. Maybe the state would, I don't know if it's, the Kuwait doesn't have a lot of district cooling. So there might be an argument for some of that. But, Saudi got the Citizens Account Program when this 2016 rise went into effect. I think the lowest 3 quintiles were getting a cash benefit that's means tested. I heard some scuttlebutt, last week that they're considering rolling that back or reducing that, the cash stipend. So if there's a hue and cry over a big reduction in cash benefits, I think it's going to make it harder for Kuwait to do it. I don't think there's going to be a lot of trust between citizens and the government, especially if the Saudis lose their cash payments. So, just to wrap up, Abu Dhabi is undergoing something very similar to this, right? So, I was, a friend of mine is interviewing for a job that is looking at trying to design some reforms for power consumption here too. So, but there has been, the Saudis are a pretty good example that you could do this. I think it's been demonstrated that power subsidies are not a citizen right, that they're, maybe a customary privilege that citizens are used to, but, I think at the end of the day, they can be taken away. There hasn't been a ton of citizen backlash in these countries. There's been some. Actually, Emiratis in Dubai, there was some backlash, a while back when that first happened. But so far, it's been pretty manageable. I mean, there's been an increase in repression in Saudi, so people complaining about government policy haven't been treated super nicely. But yeah, I think fully rationalizing the prices is going to be a challenge. Is out. They've got an opportunity to do this. The ministry's working on it. We hope they at least take some of our suggestions into consideration. So with that, I think that's all I've got. So that one's just sort of, if anybody wants to look at the tariffs, there they are.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
If anybody wants these slides, man, I'm happy to. If you want to.
Looking at it, putting this into a normal world, I think the state of Kuwait would be bankruptcy.
Yeah. Without oil rents, it would be. I mean, sort of a chicken and egg thing here. I mean, they're doing this because they have oil rents. But they couldn't do it if they didn't have oil rents. Right?
Yeah, but again, here obviously ample room for change. How do you then evaluate the chances for this change? I mean, maybe the non-existence of a parliament may be beneficial.
Yeah, so that was my first thought. Was like, oh, when the parliament was kicked out, I was like, oh, so Kuwait can finally reform its power tariffs. But that hasn't happened yet. I would say probably the most likely thing is that they'll impose at least a tiered tariff. Right now it's flat rate, two Kuwaiti fills for as much as you want. You know, a tiered tariff would at least chase out some of these Bitcoin miners and you know, the people that are really abusing the subsidy. And you know, reasonable amount, which looks like a lot of power, you know, outside Kuwait at the current price. And then pretty quickly getting up to like a cost reflective tariff, which we're seeing in some of the other countries. So I think our proposal is for like 6 tiers rather than, I think most countries here have 3 or 4. You know, we're arguing that, you know, there's a pretty broad differentiation among Kuwaitis and how much they use. So stepping them up maybe a bit more gradually.
And your data that you showed from the smart meters that was for villas.
That was only Kuwaiti villas. Yeah, that was only.
So you went down apartments, you'd have some smaller.
They'd be way smaller. Yeah. I mean, they're expats. They're paying more. They're smaller spaces. The family size is smaller. They often don't have live-in staff, etc. So yeah, they'd be a lot smaller.
You said the collection rate is less than half, so more than half of the people don't even pay this little.
Yeah, whatever little that they get, and you know, it even gets worse than that. So, so periodically on Ramadan, you know, there's this big arrears. They waive them, yeah. And if you've been diligent and paid your tariffs, then you get a credit, right? So you get a credit on your bill. So you know, one of our colleagues, a Kuwaiti guy, was, you know, telling us that he hasn't actually paid his bill in a couple of years because he still has this credit, you know, that keeps you know, keep paying off his future power demands. So it's like, so the state seems to be doing everything it can to kind of demonstrate, you know, all of the incentives seem to be on over consuming and not paying.
Please don't pay.
It's like, yeah, it's like, please use as much as you possibly can and don't bother paying. So this is like moral hazards wherever you look in this thing. So it's, you know, it's an extreme case, right? But it does have some reflection on the rest of the GCC and what, you know, what's going on in the rest of the GCC, right? Especially Abu Dhabi, I think is you know, going to be grappling with this for its own citizens too.
And the other thing you get in Kuwait, right, is people get SMSs saying, "Oh, the grid's really overstretched right now. Please do your best to save some electricity," right?
Yeah.
I guess people don't really listen to those. Well, they are.
Why would they?
I mean, they haven't listened to them sufficiently because they're just these sort of rolling blackouts, right? So, you know, now the texts are saying, well, your power is going to be off for the next 2 or 3 hours, you know, so, you know, please go to a cooling center, you know. So,
The hottest country in the GCC.
it is. Might be the hottest country in the world because the only 2 temperature readings that have globally that are higher than Kuwait are both suspicious ones from the 1930s, right? There was the Death Valley 130-degree reading, and the one in, you know, Palestine in the Negev, it's around 130 degrees. That you know, that 130 Fahrenheit. Sorry, so what is it, 54 and change? So yeah, so I mean, Kuwaitis are always like, oh, our temperature is up in the 60s now. I don't think it is, but it's I mean, maybe that's what the heat index, right? It's what, yeah, but you know, I mean, but you know, in Texas, you know, we cook these briskets, you know, on our barbecue, and you know, that is pretty close to what I cook my brisket at, right? It's not that much different, you know. So we're getting, you know, I mean, it's a lot of good reasons to change behavior on this.
So, any other questions, Jim?
Jim,
For the ideal temperature for briskets, for example?
So, but Fahrenheit, I only know in Fahrenheit about 205 degrees.
Jim, so yeah, I mean, so Kuwait is the extreme case, but if you see the continuum in the GCC of issues.
So parallels with other countries?
Parallels, yes. I mean, are the parallels more dominant than the exceptions in the GCC?
So, I mean, country by country, and you know, in the UAE, it's sort of emirate by emirate. There's some pretty deep differences, right? So Saudi, I think, has been the leader on this. They've done the most. They've reformed all prices for all segments, including water and fuel. I think their diesel price is lagging. In Saudi, they still got a lot of diesel smuggling because I think they're the lowest in the region for diesel. But for power, they've been Saudis have been pretty diligent at raising even citizen power prices in their homes. They did a big one in 2018, and it was actually so big that even the bottom tier went up a couple of cents. And it was encouraging people. We were talking about this actually in Kuwait. It was encouraging people in big villas that have extended families in these things to put in a second or sometimes a third meter, so they could capture more of that lower tier before they were getting bumped up into the higher brackets of higher price brackets. So people were kind of still finding ways to game the system, saying, this part of the villa is my quarters. We need a separate meter for this part. This part of the villa is, my son's family is in here, so let's give him a separate meter. And I guess there's some legitimacy for that, but so I've only heard about that in Saudi because of those prices have gone up so much. I mean, Dubai also, I think DEWA is solvent. I mean, it's a profit earning utility that sells pies rated. It's been I think it's being traded, right? They're on the
They IPO'd and they're traded and they have public accounts and they have bonds and this kind of stuff. I think they get a subsidy to cover the nationals.
Is it the expats cross subsidizing the nationals, or is it
I think they get paid the direct subsidy to cover the nationals, but the expats are DEWA was profitable, so the expats are more than cost reflective. And they've not changed the power prices since 2016.
Okay.
So I think if anything, they should be getting more profitable because the renewables are coming in, they're so cheap.
Yeah.
They've got a much bigger customer base now.
In Dubai for the connections of all the new developments that, because that would normally be part of the utility cost. Like if I were to look at North America, that's built into my bill. That's built into the bill in Texas and Alberta, Washington.
So to connect a building,
Well, you build a brand new development and you've got to bring your grids in, you've got to bring your residential lines in, where is that captured at each of the sites, or is that covered by DEWA some other way?
So when you take, let's say you buy a home, when you take delivery, you pay a connection charge. Now, and that's quite a lot of money actually. So that may well be covering the entire cost. I'm not sure if at what point up to what meter the utility's responsibility stops, but at least the final part of it is paid for by each building owner or homeowner or whatever.
In Abu Dhabi, for example, substations, that's all on the stock of developer.
So it goes into the electricity cost.
I think so.
With the bill, yeah. That's what
I mean, it's all, it's certainly in Dubai, it's all DEWA, right up to your meter. The developer isn't an owner or involved there at all, but the cost is charged. I think I'm trying to recall what I did. I think I paid the developer and the developer then paid DEWA from what I recall.
So the transmission from these new renewable, solar plants out in the desert to getting it into where the load is. The developer's not paying for that transmission. That's the state utility. That's probably one of the reasons that we're getting some of these record low tariffs.
Sometimes it depends.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
They made me, when I did a large solar project, they made me pay for the subsidy.
Oh, they did?
But then again, that's part of the overall bill. So.
So going back to Kuwait, I'm just curious, did anyone look to do any distributed generation? I mean, given the fact that citizens are generally wealthier, did anyone try and
I mean, the only sector that has a tariff on there that would encourage them to do that is the government sector, right? So it's like, no, I didn't see any.
Whatsoever, if you look at the situation there,
Yeah.
payment discipline is very low. Collection is extremely low, and there is this.
I'm just wondering if faced with those blackouts, regardless of what I'm paying, if I had a disposable income.
Had a different tariff. Then yes.
Yeah.
To change the tariff system.
I mean, Kuwaiti homes are packed so close together. I mean, so they have some roof space, but their power demand is so huge that their roof space probably not sufficient to.
Or you run a generator
Power
instead.
It'd probably keep their fridge going, and I don't know if they could keep their AC going with that, panels on that side roof space. I mean, there's villas are, they're going up vertically. They're like, 4, sometimes 5 stories. They all have elevator shafts on the roof now. So.
Quick question, for Robin and Jim and anybody else. How are these power subsidies blocking progress in other areas of environmental policy? For example, Saudi Arabia, UAE, they're trying to create carbon market, taking initial steps for that. I mean, does this subsidy need to be reformed first before they can fully implement carbon trading, etc.?
Sure, the carbon market wouldn't be government thing, right? The government wouldn't pay for carbon, that would be everybody else. So.
It depends where you locate the subsidy. We had a bit of a discussion around this with the Omanis. And our argument to them was push the subsidy to the end user, so it's clear where it sits. If you then need to pay them a check so that they're kind of keep them whole, do that, but don't have hidden subsidies all the way through the chain. As long as the wholesale market operates like a proper market, you can have a carbon price or whatever you need to do at that point, and then it's at least transparent where it is.
Yeah, this is self-police. Yeah, if you want to get, and that's in any country, right? I mean, it's the same in Egypt, the same in Morocco. If you want to give people money, give the people money who actually need the money. Mm-hmm. Energy subsidies are just stupid.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and don't stick the subsidy on the gas, let's say, because then your guy will use gas rather than solar.
Mm-hmm. I mean, a carbon price would discourage the oil side of this. The most expensive thing would make it even more expensive. So, I mean, but
they would
the government got to put up
to do something that's less expensive.
Yeah.
For the carbon markets, I'm quite convinced that if they want to keep consuming this way, which is fossil fuels, Article 6 of the Paris Agreement will be a mechanism used to reach the NDCs of the countries. And I think that will put a price on carbon in the government. Kind of like when corporates offset CO2 emissions, give them a price, and then they put a price on carbon scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. But considering targets of Kuwait in their NDCs and net zero 2060, even interim targets 2035, I think the Article 6 of the Paris Agreement is going to be a big game for them.
Mm-hmm. Did they update their NDC or update them?
But they said that Article 6 will be used. They didn't say it will be the major instrument, but it will help reach the target for sure.
Well, not every target is going to be reached, Simon.
Will help. Yeah.
Certainly not in this region. I was meeting with carbon science and your experience was in creating wholesale markets.
Picture of Belgium.
Part of it was in Belgium.
Southern Belgium.
A very liberal market. It's mostly on the electricity side. The end part of the French market, because this is where more or less the people owns all of the Belgian. So what happened in Europe, maybe you should see a couple of slides with much data on this. It's 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, it's actually the first package was to embark on a single European energy market that would lead to competitive prices within the European Union, and benefited very much to the countries to make it happen. So here again, so the targets were not met, and that's why the second package came out with package legislation. So you're talking directives, then left considerably less freedom to the member states how to implement the market. But it's fair to say that only with the third package, so we're talking now more than 10 years later after the first one was issued, the liberalization was reached, meaning that everyone that had structures, meaning vertically along the value chain from generation to the end customer, had unbundled these companies into trade and supply and grid functionality on the side, and all of them have started to deliver their power or their gas. The same is true for power and gas to deliver their say commodity outside their traditional backyards that they had at the beginning of the process. The whole thing has been kicked off by the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom had already previously reorganized their power and gas markets, notably because they just didn't have any other ways how to get investments into the aging infrastructure. So the government of the United Kingdom has then organized that market in the mid-90s, or beginning of the 90s even, and they brought their ideas and their experience, and also a lot of influence on the rest of the European Union states.
Sorry, do you mind switching with Jim just because they're online currently? Yeah, thanks.
Now, looking at more recent events, you have the clean energy package that now looks at integrating the clean energy into the mix. The current generation of green electricity in Europe, on average, is close to 50% now, and that means also that the clean energy needs to get more and more integrated. The initial incentives that were enabled to build that capacity are running out, notably the feed-in tariff that was instigated more than 20 years ago. It's coming to its end, or has already come to its end in some countries. We can go to the next slide. So this is what it really did. I already sort of summarized it all. So in reality, only the third package then provided for full market opening, regulated access to the grids. Grids, by definition, are national monopolies. So only the regulation of these monopolies that for third parties onto these grids as an equal level playing field. Effective unbundling was more or less in place in most of the countries in about 2009. So this is the date that the third package was issued. It was the year 2009. And it also brought, let's say, a wider cooperation between the 28 member states at the time. The establishment of ACER, meaning the European Cooperation for Energy Regulators, was obviously the decision taken by the European governments that did not want to have a national, let's say, a supranational regulator. They opted more for a cooperation platform between the existing national regulators to make it less substantial, simply because at the end of the day, energy remains very much a national thing. And they didn't want to actually give too much powers to the European institution in this field. And this is what independent what already was there in terms of power shifting to the EU before. That's why the cooperation was the option. And on the other hand, the other stakeholders, the main stakeholders, are the infrastructure providers. They were then organized in European clubs called ENTSO-E for electricity and ENTSO-G for gas. But since then, a lot of things have happened, not only the clean energy package that is making headlines since then, but also the war in Ukraine has substantially changed many things. The complete supply disruption of gas that was previously mostly supplied from Russia has clearly put the whole system under strain. Next slide. So this is what the EU has more or less on one slide designed to be the role model for the remaining 27 countries that has left the EU, as everybody knows. So, but has kept more or less the same system in place. So the generators ultimately compete with each other. Every country continues to have a national generation mix. This creates then obviously a different marginal cost. This again brings then opportunities to trade cross-border. We just heard about Robin talking about the potential for the MENA countries that could actually result from arbitrage. The same is true for Europe. Everybody has their different mix, and this has created also the need to trade and also has produced, let's say, enough incentives to to trade across borders. Robin said that only 5% of the trade, physical trade, is actually done through borders, but this obviously does not include information on the financial trading. The financial markets today are a multiple of the physical market. It's a $1 trillion market for the European Union. 1 trillion, that is 1,000 million, sorry. So it's a big market, and it also is coming with a very large carbon market that has been developed since 2009 through the ETS regime that now is active in the European Union. What has been less of a success are the GOOs, the guarantees of origin. Why have these been less successful? It had to do, probably, to put it short, with the egoism of national member states that didn't want national subsidies to go to their neighbors. We've seen some of this a little bit reflected in the earlier talk. So it's actually not that unusual. German subsidized green electricity was meant to be kept in Germany. Subsidies not going to the neighboring countries. This is now gradually resolved, at least as far as the power side is concerned. With AIB, we now have an international European register where we can also, these GOs can be traded, can be transferred across borders, but it took a very long time to do it, and we're struggling with it with gas, and we're even more struggling with things like green hydrogen, where we can see that it's a total failure of the European Union to provide for a market that has any potential to go anywhere, and given the regulatory differences that persist in the European Union today. Next slide. So what it really all is about, it is really the old integrated model that was given up. Most of the utilities were state-owned or owned by communes or regions. They had everything from power generation to retail supply, and this system has been then broken up to provide for a free market. Next slide. So this is how it now looks like. We have the unbundled functionality. We have the transmission and distribution being the national monopolies being regulated, being open to third-party access, and then we have the power generation being non-regulated, but ultimately competing with each other across the borders, but also at national level with a very varied generation mix within the 27 countries that are today part of the European Union. Next slide. So why has it been so important? What were the underlying reasons of it? Well, obviously, this is what Britain promoted, and it's correct. Supply and demand must be constantly in sequence to each other. There's limited storage in your large storage capacities that are from pump storage are available from Switzerland, from Austria, and from Norway. So Norway has a key position in providing, let's say, just storage, but obviously, there is a lot of battery developments in the European Union these days, and obviously with the technical progress that is going on there, I think also we will find other ways of storing electricity, because this is the big problem. The only energy source we can actually practically store is gas and oil. We cannot store electricity at this point in time, or we have limitations. So far, that is a key issue that will be ultimately resolved with technology in the future. So trading optimizes supply according to the location and the time of demand. So it brings in demand and location. It creates a new tier of the business. Well, obviously, we have seen with all the renewable electricity that has come alive within the last 15 to 20 years, that we're ending up also with quite some periods of negative prices, because in Europe, power can go into negative prices, then paying for or opening up for opportunities for demand management, giving companies the incentives to actually go online whenever there is the power available for free or even for less than free. And then we have obviously the cross-border wholesale transactions. They keep actually sending price signals, which ultimately is then efficient in terms of finding investment for new generation of infrastructure that needs to be built. We can go to the next slide. So this is the same at the end of the day. Efficiencies can be created not only across regions, but also across fuels. And obviously here, the idea has been in the European Union to phase out coal as being the main responsible, or let's say at least the worst from all the hydrocarbon in terms of carbon, but also let's say ultimately finding other ways that are low carbon to keep the lights on. Gas is always described as a bridge to the future, but I think that may be a very long bridge. I think there will be a long time the gas being used for periods that the sort of renewable energy will not be available. And according to the price setting, that has also meant in the past and will also mean in the future, unless the system is changed, that gas will be the price setter for electricity. Simply, it is the most expensive of all fuels and will continue to be so. Then there is a lot of virtue of the interrelated products. Today, if you look at the spot markets, the most important information for the price of electricity today is the weather. So at the end of the day, the big trading floors in Europe, you find a lot of information that focuses on wind and solar on the next days. These sort of parameters are driving the power price on the spot market window. And there is a lot of efficiency for the financial markets and derivatives. This is also something that eventually could be understood here by the countries in the region, that physical markets could also be used to emerge or make emerge financial markets. There could be financial markets that could become very active here in the region, given the enormous power demand that there is on the physical side. Next slide. So this is a sort of a picture that brings it all on one slide. Ultimately, what's how it is organized, or was it organized originally? How is it organized now? The main sort of platform, or let's say for the wholesale level, obviously, are the power exchanges. This should be something that could, for example, be organized around the GCC if they have the authority to do so. They could organize a market there, whereby they could then look for organizing auctions that could enable physical exchange of electricity across borders. And these could be either brokered, so that these would be then bilateral relationships between the involved utilities, or they could be obviously centralized in the sense that there is a central settlement on the platform, but that would require then, in particular, clearing service to be developed. Next slide. So what are the pillars? Well, the pillars definitely are the standardization of everything. We've done that in Europe. Here again, the United Kingdom had a central influence to all of it, also in terms of standardization of contracts, in liquidity building on the continent. Today there is various electricity exchanges. The biggest electricity market in Europe is the German electricity market by far. It has today a multiple of megawatt hour that is traded between this and and there is a fully transparent system which is enabled either by exchanges or by brokers, giving you at any point in time a price for electricity and gas at any country that you're looking for. So ultimately you have now for all 27 markets, it's fair to say, for any point in time an electricity price. That helps also then in terms of enabling markets. Next slide. So are the prices then really formed? This is obviously say was big discussion around this model, the curve, so to say, the merit order curve. This is again something that was coming from the UK, has now been more or less probably based throughout the entire union, and it became under extreme strains when obviously the gas price as a price setter then was coming under strain thanks to sudden supply disruptions as a consequence of geopolitics.
So I thought the EU was getting away from that gas price as the main establishment of the wholesale electricity.
There was a lot of discussion about it, Jim, but in reality, so far nothing has happened. In reality, it has worked very well over the last 20 years, and it has even survived the time of strain, because obviously, if you lose more or less 50% of the entire gas supply within one day, you can see that even during these extreme circumstances, they were at any given moment of the time there was a price for electricity, for gas being displayed on exchange. So the system has worked. It obviously leads to sometimes strained relationships. It may be replaced eventually, but we're not quite yet there. I think gas will continue to be around for another 20 years to be, let's say, a price setter, unless there was a complete change of system, which currently is not yet envisaged. Next slide.
If I may just add to that question, is that just in the UK, they look, it's down to the market design. As Jan said, Jan sets the price in the electricity market because it's the margin demand. But the market design, obviously, this is such that you can't remove the correlation of gas in the electricity sector. If you move away from it, then it's called REMA, Review of Electricity Market Reforms, etc. That was looking at exactly that question, which wasn't pushed, which didn't actually go ahead. That would have been a massive change in how the price is set. It was looking at the average price as opposed to the marginal plant. So in any country in Europe, the most expensive plant would be a gas-fired plant. And if that's running, which it is most of the time, I mean, renewables come in and out, then that sets the price.
Yeah, those wind generators that were making sort of extraordinary profits during that.
Yeah, exactly. So they actually take a windfall because you have gas still on the system, and gas needs a minimum, short-term margin cost to be dispatched. Whereas the wind is basically next to nothing. There's fewer fuel costs.
Going to consumer bills.
So that's a market design question, which is fundamentally.
Yeah, we had a number of, let's say, reactions to get windfall profits after the power crisis in 22. Some collected money from the utilities, also from the renewable generators for the additional profits that they were generating during the times of crisis. And this was very much discussion then whether at the end of the day the whole size of the pricing system should be changed, but this has not been decided, at least not for now. The trading horizons for companies, they are looking like you see here on the slides. Most of the production is already sold off years ahead, and remaining optimization of the portfolio happens normally on the day ahead or intraday level. So at the end of the day, all of these are separate markets that are serviced by the industry for many years. So next slide. So what are typical transaction timeframes in the European markets? What are the execution types? Well, obviously, most of the market has now moved into the spot market. This has to do with the generation in renewables gaining more and more traction. And let's face it, also it has to do with other, let's say, more like an environment of not giving too much credit to counterparts. Obviously, with your trading short term, the exposures are smaller. So it is fair to say that most of the trading now takes place in the spot market. So we have here a spot market would typically then also include, let's say, day ahead, but also intraday trading. All of these markets, including the balancing markets, have in the meantime been open, so they're no longer only serviced by one utility, but they're serviced through auctions where many market participants are participating. And then there are the forward or future contracts. The forward contracts are the ones that are physically settled. The future contracts are the ones which are financially settled, where the settlement is cash, whereas in forward market, normally the settlement is the electricity or the gas at a given delivery point. So these all have been completely standardized for 27 countries, or include the UK, plus the UK and plus Switzerland. They're all looking the same now, same products, same contracts, same delivery features. So this is a trading, it's also to a certain extent a follow-up on a standardization exercise that needs to be done, and it would need to be done here. Next slide. So look at the region here. The only light, let's say, here in this region where we are is Oman. They have created what I would think a functioning spot market for their electricity. They haven't done anything on the gas side. Looking a little bit wider in the region, only Turkey has created a functioning gas and electricity market, and is also now more recently moving ahead with a carbon market. This also has to do with CBAM and the, let's say, exposure of the Turkish industry to Europe as their main region of exports. For Oman, this is not the same. I think the reasons for Oman to moving forward is just their depleting oil and gas reserves and their search to look for diversification. This also has to be seen with in the context of their good efforts in hydrogen space to bring this in hydrogen in, also not only for export but also for national consumption. The electricity market in this country, this is very small country, is new. It went live January 22, so it's only not even 3 years old, and has basically relies on single buyers, which is the thing you do before you go into full market opening. So by the way, a similar system is also followed by other countries in Central Asia. So moving away from fully into single buyer systems as a period of time before then fully open the market sometime later. So there are submission of half-hourly offers, and there is also a price signal, and I think this is the most important thing of all of it. It gives price signals that are then also realistic and that are real, so to say. And so far, they're improving the efficiency of dispatch and enables, let's say, uncontracted and post-PPA output sales, because we all know that PPAs, by definition, end at a certain point in time, and this market provides for these, let's say, time after such PPA expire. Next slide. So, what could it really do here? I think we have more or less the region markets could bring in a better interconnection. It could bring a better network stability. I think we don't need to really talk about it because it has been already said by other speakers here. So if ever this potential could be used, it would not only save money, it would also actually bring a better grid functionality, and it would also generate profits to a certain extent. This is clear. So there are clear price signals that could be built and then also used for a cheaper dispatch and a lower system cost. That would be obviously clear advantages of having done something here in the region. And that is, I think, the last slide. Or is there anything? Yeah, well, how could it look like? Here I put on a slide which basically shows you how electricity or gas is traded these days. You either have an exchange, most of the exchanges on continuous auctions on the physical side, and then also the lookalikes on the futures market. And they also run spot markets as a part thereof. And then there is exactly the same on the OTC side. So what is the difference between both? Obviously, the exchange typically provides for central clearing. That comes also with a certain clearing cost, and other markets, let's say OTC markets as such, provides not for automatic clearing, but for an optional clearing. And here is brokered between counterparts directly. So this is really the OTC market as we're seeing. OTC standing for over the counter. This is what it means. It has been tried or has been practiced in America for about 30 years and in Europe now about 25 years. So they have really been seen along the way. These markets have been operated this way, and they exist next to each other. So they also don't disturb each other. They are just different avenues to pure trades. Next slide. Yeah, this is obviously the more, let's say, current challenge, how to create a market for green electricity, how to actually integrate these into the market as such, because we all know that obviously renewable electricity comes at a much lower price than, let's say, traditional generation. So there is a certain cannibalization effect that can be, let's say, witnessed in a number of countries, and which also shows signals of resolve. So in reality, we need to find a way how to finalize, or let's say, how to secure the integration of these renewable energies into the wider market. What is a key thing, I think, also for ZETA is to always repeat that the green capacity or the green credit can be traded separately from the underlying commodities, so that actually the certificates that could be generated with green certificates should be tradable as a separate instrument. It could also be subject to separate, let's say, trade-offs or transactions independent from the underlying sort of commodity trades. So this has been enabled in Europe, and it's actually working really well. It has provided an overall reduction of 35% of carbon output compared to the 1990 targets. So it has worked also to scale down the carbon intensity that was previously existing in the European Union. So ultimately, the way of having carbon markets established, either through an ETS system and have it complemented by a system of green certificates that are traded separately, can provide for an effective integration of these new generation into an existing traditional market. Next slide. I think that was it. Thank you very much for your attention. Yeah, I think we are at the end. Are there any questions? You have one.
Well, you had like, I mean, sort of the let's say the company overview of things. So what about prosumers? You know, people like me that have some solar panels on, want to charge your EV and the batteries in the basement and all of it. How is that going to impact the bigger market?
It will impact the bigger market. It will help the bigger market in market integration, because it will then enable to have a more elastic demand pattern. That at least is the target. So prosumers are coming up in some countries, not in others. So prosumers, you will see, are existing in places like the Benelux countries, or Germany, or France, or England, but you will not find a lot of prosumers in Greece, for example, or in Croatia, where prosumers are virtually unknown. So in reality, what you need in order to make it happen are flexible grids that are enabled to actually also manage the demand of consumers. And you don't have these smart grids everywhere rolled out in the European Union yet. Once this is finished, and I think these smart grids are now on the highest priority in terms of investment that is funded by the European Union, the prosumers will help to create a more elastic demand scenarios, and actually will become market participants like any other market participants as well. But it's a new development, and it needs to be in line with the technology that is available to make it happen. So, but yeah, I mean, in generally, all of these, let's say, demand change efforts are very much part of the transition.
Because I mean, you're getting into, let's say, you know, dynamics, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can basically throw an entire country or entire grid upside down in a couple of years.
That's right.
You're saying rightly that, you know, Greece and Croatia not part of this yet. But if I look at how quickly it's grown in the Netherlands now, you know, the grid companies, you know, they're struggling to get paid, and you know, to keep the grid up and all of that. There's way too much solar now. And, you know, what are we going to do? And all of that, you know, it's, how do you plan for that? I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's your largest?
Well, it's somebody that you know, not only, you know, buys electricity, but also puts it back into the grid. So if you have solar on your roof, like 1/3 of the Netherlands now has that, and Germany is growing. It's growing almost everywhere. People are now starting to you know, put batteries in the basement. So you're also drastically cutting demand overall, because, you know, that and these things, you know, batteries were not a thing 3 years ago, and now everybody's looking at batteries. If they're affordable, it's just like €2,000, and they're sort of almost off the grid. But you still want the grid, of course.
Yes.
So then that whole grid model is becoming challenged, right?
Is that the utility death spiral?
Yeah.
Layers?
I mean, how do you? Because then, you know, you want to keep the, you know, the grid stability there, but then are people, you know, what's your social contract? Are you still going to be able to pay for that when you've already sort of like bought your own house? Almost.
Yeah, you have these smaller, you know, poorer consumers typically in apartments that don't have solar, that are stuck paying these higher grid costs, right? So it becomes a aggressive price.
Yeah, there is this cannibalization, I think, that is happening, and that remains unresolved. I think it may be resolved ultimately. Some of the issues may be resolved by technical progress. Also, more performing battery, more performing ways of storing electricity in the future. But how to actually guarantee the future of a healthy utility, that is indeed a thing to think about. I think it will probably be paid by tariffs that are paid to them for just keeping the system alive, by reserve markets, reserve energy markets, which they will then charge for. Also, maybe they may not, that these power stations they keep may not be used in the future.
But I think also for you, would you see that there is like a new future for nuclear coming in Europe? How would you see it, Robin, from far? Of course, there obviously is a lot of countries that are looking into nuclear again. Then there is particularly a couple of countries in Europe that have never skipped it, such as France, for example. Would you see there's a business case for nuclear for the future?
We've done quite a bit of work on nuclear in this region. Not so much in Europe, but I, as you say, view it from a distance. I think it's honestly, I wouldn't mind seeing nuclear have a role, but I struggle to make the case for it, just on cost growth. If Europe could build nuclear at the same cost as the Chinese do, absolutely has a place, but they don't. Will a few governments subsidize it enough that some gets built? Yeah, probably. But is it going to be a really significant part? I really struggle to see it. Even the SMRs. I mean, we did a study of SMRs, and you believe all the great technical stories about them and so on. Even then, it is not. If you believe in a world of pretty low cost renewables and increasing low cost batteries and so on, I struggle to see where new nuclear comes in, even with SMRs. To keep old nuclear running, sure, fine. I think it's a struggle. I think for China, it's a completely different story because the Chinese plants are just built at such a competitive cost.
There's probably an energy security argument, though, for something like you, right? For renewables and for clean power, it's not importing fuel.
Yeah, there's always this long, and then there's always, particularly Europe, this long duration storage issue, right? Okay, how do you? Exactly. What is the best solution for that? Is that pumped hydro? Is it the hydrogen? Is it nuclear? Is it whatever?
This, so with the Google flows, 2 weeks a year, 3 weeks a year? That shouldn't dictate how we've lost.
No, sure. And some people just keep the gas plants going.
Gas plants, and then later on, when hydrogen is cheaper, you do that.
And that is why the gas prices, I think the gas pricing mechanism will stay, because they will ultimately always be used in the future.
But then you need to move to some kind of capacity market, right? Because whatever the capacity is, whether it's gas or nuclear or whatever is provided.
That's exactly what is going to come in Europe.
Yeah, I think the thing with nuclear is also, I mean, it doesn't match very well with variable renewables. I mean, are you going to switch on or off, or how is it going to work? So then you're going to curtail renewables, which is what we're doing in Abu Dhabi right now. You're just throwing away eggs that you've already paid for. That doesn't make a lot of sense.
It doesn't, although the batteries helps you there. I think batteries are good for renewables. I think they're also good for nuclear.
Yeah, we got a paper on batteries for nuclear. That's all that additional power overnight to one thing or another. Seemed to be it.
You see a case for nuclear SMRs, for example, in the United States?
I haven't done the numbers on it, but there seems to be I know there's a lot of excitement about it. There's like, everything from micro nuclear on the back of a truck to clean up the emissions from oil and gas. So use it for frack jobs. To SMRs in various places to replace coal or.
It's still very much up in the air.
Replace coal, put them on these sites with coal plants that have been shuttered. Using the transmission that's already there. On the cost base, I don't know. I mean, we don't, we're not able to build offshore wind in the U.S. right now. Some places, for one reason or another, aren't near solar. It's coal and gas. So, maybe there's a. Also we just finished a nuclear power plant there that was like 3 times over budget that took decades to finish.
But we have seen elsewhere. We have seen that in France with the nuclear power plants in the east of France that took, I think, 30 years to build. And then there is Hinkley Point in the UK, we're showing similar features. So I think This is actually true for many of these the new nukes. They're getting very expensive due to unscheduled.
In the US that didn't get built, it was partially built that they finally canceled in South Carolina. It's a lot of risk and financial risk. As the costs go up or technology changes.
But even French fleet, I mean, the initial capex, and then they've actually invested more than that in the last 30 years to keep them, up to standard and not leaking. And I don't know what's safe and all that.
Okay, I mean, every form of electricity generation has been subsidized. I think it's a true statement. Green electricity has been subsidized. The nuclear electricity that was proposed to be the future of our world has been subsidized in the 70s. Some of us have already forgotten about it. At the end of the day, cheap electricity or cheap energy has fueled the progress in countries. This is not the Netherlands could actually progress due to very cheap gas they had available. Germany could progress because of very cheap coal that was there in abundance. And let's see what the future brings. But I think it was a very good meeting. I wanted to thank you for coming here and for those who are still hanging on there and on the line. Thank you for your time, and we'll continue this part of setup for next year. Thank you.